I'm here with Rusty and Solid, and we're going to be talking
Hello.
about the intricacies of the lore of Corpse Eater and where media stands today. So, how are you guys doing?
Doing good.
Well, it's Thursday, and you know what they say: the boss makes a dollar, I make a dime. That's why I draw on company time. So
I like that version.
That is a good version.
I try.
So,
I try.
what are you working on now?
Right now, I am coloring. What is it? Page 5 of this comic. So it's coming along. Or is it page 6? You know what? It's where starring Pedro. I'm gonna zoom in. This guy meets his friend Dusty, and then interesting things happen. Nothing too auspicious or scary. Just two old friends meeting up again.
I love how you set that up for something totally scary and auspicious.
I would never do that. Our 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 readers are like children to me. I have to make sure that they're expecting exactly what they're going to get. I'm not going to set them up for anything spooky. What do you take me for? Uh, his name. Someone who's trying to write Get Out? No, I would never do that. Good show, by the way, or movie, if anyone has had the misfortune of not watching it in their lifetime. Let's say.
Yeah, Get Out was uncomfortable.
But I guess speaking of which, it does sort of remind me of uh, what we had been discussing earlier, Rusty, when it came to I guess how everything is kind of samey nowadays when it comes to the media. Because yeah, I know Jordan Peele is, you know, he's doing some interesting stuff as far as like what he puts out, but I don't really think that you're going to get too many get outs or us. Is I don't know how you would make us plural since it's already plural, but us's out there just because it's like, if something pushes too much against the grain, like there just isn't really space for it right now.
That being said, Rusty, what do you feel like? Can tell me a little bit about this project that you're working on, Corpse Eater, and the lore behind it.
Yeah, okay. So I think it is, in a lot of ways, a very kind of straightforward story, but at the same time, it's pretty all encompassing. I think it's looking at things through a lot of different lenses, and I think what really attracted me to coming on board, at least initially, was the way that it's at least trying to play with certain political themes and religious themes in a way that I think is different than most things tend to do, or it's not playing with those themes from the center or from the point of view of something that's going to be corporate friendly or marketable. It's just taking these themes and really playing around with them in sort of fun and new ways and sort of logical ways. And I think it also has a lot of that element of, if you like Futurama, I know I've done a lot of comparing this project to Futurama for better or worse, but I think it has a lot of that element of what's some concept between now or maybe something of the past 200 years. And now let's take it to an extremely far future and stretch it to its logical extremes and play around with what that might look like. And I think that's led to some pretty interesting ideas. I think we've found a pretty compelling reasoning for why non-organic creatures would continue to have religion. For example, I hope that people who read the comic find it believable that the robots and androids are engaging in some sort of religion, but I think we come up with pretty fun reasons for why and pretty compelling reasons for why down the road.
And I know for a fact that I like from thus far the thing that's been the most fun for me regarding that has been essentially being able to pitch the idea of what if robot Santa Claus, but he is considered God by robots, to folks like Rusty, and it just going completely off the wall in a good way.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of really fun, and I'm kind of stealing this from a different group of writers, but like one thing that particular group said is that they write very independently, but like one person will come up with an idea and then someone else will just take that idea and run with it and come back with something completely insane and different than what had started out. And I think there's been a lot of that in that project that's been very fun. Like someone will come to the table with like a very vague idea, like say Immortal Caliph, or just like something that sounds cool, and that'll speak so much to someone else that 24 hours later there'll be like a 10-page treatment of like, all right, I've got all these ideas about how this guy could maybe function, and I think that's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's that, and also like in a previous take of this, like just like it's sort of like what you were saying, Rusty, where it's like it's not meant to be corporate friendly, and it's something that I'm hoping that we can keep with any future projects, just because it's like I don't think, like I guess like with everything that's going on in Hollywood right now, I don't think like they would greenlight something where it's like, hey, let's take like meaningful and purposeful shots at some of the major religions of the world and play with it and see what it would actually turn into, and let it have some bite behind it that actually says something meaningful about the world and like what we should be doing to make it a better place.
Yeah, and oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, to run with that even further, the one thing that I like is, like, even though it's taking, like, meaningful bites at religion, like I said up front, it's not just giving you the religion is bad, and like the conclusion of the story is not, well, there should be no religion, nor is the conclusion, well, there should be a religion. I think it's trying to take a much more contextual and nuanced view of those things, and I think it's trying to get rid of certain preconceived notions that we always think, for corporate reasons, it's very convenient that, well, everybody who's left-leaning or LGBTQIA or, not white or any one of these different groups, well, they're always this particular narrowly defined ideology that's very marketable too. But if we look at our own history, like, that's just not true at all. People are incredibly complicated and multifaceted, and it leads to like these very human expressions of the very interesting intersections of ideas that sometimes are in conflict within individuals. But I think being honest with that instead of trying to compartmentalize it, I think has been very fun, and I think it's led to some characters that feel a bit more human and less one dimensional, even when they're written to be like archetypical.
Yeah, and I think, sort of to push on that and kind of to, I guess, answer another question, is like when it comes to the like sort of inspiration behind things, it's also like, while we're not trying to say this thing good, that thing bad, it's also not like that centrist type deal where it's like, well, obviously the answer lies somewhere in the middle. Mm-hmm. Like it's more like, sometimes folks are right and sometimes they are wrong, and they may be looking at something either the right or wrong way, but the outcome is defined by how everyone works with the consequences of those actions and seeing what that ultimately turns into and then how that affects society as a whole.
Yeah, and please tell me a little bit more about your inspirations for this project.
I guess for me, the main thing has been both like the racial and economic tensions that have been obviously brought up in a lot of the works that have been around, like with Get Out and Us, and even more mainstream stuff like the Avengers and Black Panther. But with those, they never seem to like actually. And I know it's because of where the bread is buttered, but it's like they never take the step of saying like, and this is what should actually be done. Because like they'll always tiptoe up to that line, and then when it's like, okay, the cards are on the table, it's now or never to say what actually needs to be done. It turns into this milquetoast. Well, maybe if we just tried capitalism a little bit harder, and it's like, okay, guys, like even the villain had a point, and you decided to destroy that. And it's kind of like wanting to say that story where it's like, this needs to go, and this is what needs to be put in its place, and saying it in an entertaining way.
And what about you, Rusty? I know you mentioned like Futurama and.
Yeah, well, I want to start off with something like a little bit more serious, just to not seem so lame in the wake of that great response by Solid. But I think one of the things that actually did inspire me, especially early on when we were getting into this area, was like the opportunity to talk about and promote the idea of Christian anarchism, because I think a lot of left-wing people, or there's, like I said, that knee-jerk reaction to go, well, everyone who's left-wing doesn't like religion, and religion is therefore, the domain of extreme, right-wing people. And to an extent, at this particular moment in our history, right now in the year of our Lord 2023, yeah, that's a really, like, obviously that's happening. But again, historically, like, it's not necessarily the case. Even just going back one generation, so much of that social change that happened in the 60s that liberals and boomers love to jerk off to and give us a very watered down version of, a lot of that was fostered in religious organizations. Like, those were the nexus points in the community that allowed people to organize. Not everyone has a union, but back then, pretty much everybody had a church, for better or worse, and there were people who recognized that and were able to galvanize those things for social change on both sides of that political spectrum. So I think giving people an opportunity to engage with that kind of stuff again would be really cool, but also to get an inspiration to see that actually, if you've never engaged with any like religious texts for yourself, but have only heard what, very anti-religion or very pro-religion people have said about those texts, I really want people to get a chance to engage with those texts on their own, because I wouldn't consider myself a Christian, but I would consider myself a Christian anarchist, because I think that those two things sync up very well. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to go, I don't understand how that's possible. But if you actually do like a very basic amount of like research into the history of both Christianity and anarchism, it's actually pretty self-evident, like how that particular discipline of thought could emerge. And then my less serious answer is the Venture Brothers. Obviously, as I call myself Rusty, is a big inspiration to me. And in one of the ways that I like it, I'm sure you guys have heard me say before that I think everything on TV right now, especially if it's a cartoon, is just, I call it worse Venture Brothers. Because it looks like Venture Brothers, it talks like Venture Brothers, it's an adult animated cartoon. Maybe it's referencing superheroes or Scooby-Doo or some kind of thing from the past that you like. and they're using bad words, and it feels like it's supposed to be something, but it's actually a lot of nothing. And that's because when you go back and watch a show like The Venture Brothers, yeah, it was referencing superheroes and G.I. Joe and all this old crap, from the 20th century. And it was saying that it was an incredibly toxic and flawed thing that brought with it all of these horrible expectations of manhood and these rules of engagement, and it held up a lens to nerd culture, a culture which the creators obviously love, but they put it up a mirror up to it, and they're like, these are all the ways in which fan culture is incredibly bad. And what we have now, they killed that show, and what we have now are fake imitations of that show that look like it visually. They talk about the same content, but you're not getting that criticism. You're not getting that call to action to look at yourself and go, like, how many people have watched The Venture Brothers and gone, oh shit, I know a Dermot, or I am Dermot, or oh damn, I'm Henchman 21 here. I don't like that. Like, you know what I mean? And I like an opportunity to bring that kind of humor, the kind of humor it's funny, but it's also critical, but not in like a preachy way. It's not necessarily trying to tell you what to think, but it's pointing out those inconsistencies and then trying to encourage the person engaging with it to come away with something on their own.
Definitely. I mean, I think it hasn't been fleshed out in this first chapter very much, but I think it's also like, as we get into it and we're able to like show more of like the like Muslim community in this story, like also being able to show that it's like, yeah, like a lot of these people may not call themselves capital A anarchists or anything like that, but that you can actually see in just regular folks, regardless of how air quotes good or evil they are, that folks tend to lean towards this if you put them in a situation where they need to work together, where they need to show solidarity in order to make something better. Not saying that happens 100% of the time.
But I like that. I like that sentiment, because that's another thing that I think, as I get older and, more bitter and cynical, and especially in the industry I work in outside of my comic book life, let's just say you encounter a lot of people whose politics come from a book. But every once in a while, I'll encounter someone like myself in this industry whose politics comes from lived experience, and you can just kind of tell, right? And I think, you don't need to read Das Kapital to understand why your shitty minimum wage job sucks, and they don't need someone talking down to it. So I think what I'm hopeful that this project will do is expressing the very real political problems that we face, but trying to put it in a language that's more human.
Yeah,
it's I like that. Can you tell me a little bit more about the lore, guys, and kind of just start from the beginning of how this world comes into being, drifting apart from our own, and then going into where, without spoilers, where these first few chapters kind of start to explore?
Sure. I guess as far as like, if you want an elevator pitch, it's sort of like, what if the Terminator had a day job? Because the way I see it, like a lot of these...
I love that.
A lot of these post-apocalyptic movies, yeah. Like a lot of these post-apocalyptic movies, they look at it and they're like, oh, well, clearly the robots are going to, rise up and like nuke the world and everyone's going to just die. And it's like, no, it's probably going to be more like what we're seeing nowadays, where it's like, okay, first the robots are going to do stuff better than us. Maybe that leads to plenty for some. Maybe it leads to poverty for others. Who's to say? But as you move along this timeline, eventually it gets to the point where the robots are like, well, why do we need you to buy our stuff when there's more of us than there are of you? Clearly, you're obsolete even for this most basic part of the economy, and seeing what the repercussions for that are. And in doing so, we sort of follow the impossible cynic character. You know who they are. They're your Joel or any other like dark-haired, white, buffy-bearded man in video games who is also an antagonist who can destroy an entire army with their bare hands. And on the other side, you have your, and I say this lovingly, like the wide-eyed liberal who just will not give up that ghost. That if we just follow the rules, guys, everything will be fine.
All right, can you give me another take of that last sentence? Start with, and on the other side of that, we have this other character, and you meant to say Jubilee or Charity?
Yeah, that's Jubilee. Okay. Where it's like
the audio cut you out. Just go ahead and do me a retake on that one.
Okay, and on the other side, you have Jubilee. She's that lovable liberal who is like, guys, if we just follow the rules and petition hard enough, I'm sure Monsanto will stop poisoning the water supply and allow these Indian farmers not to die from debt peonage. And just sort of seeing where these two folks can go if they follow I wouldn't say the basics of their ideology, but follow the tenets that they have fallen into to their logical conclusion. Because I think that it'll surprise people where those two decide to finally wind up.
Rusty, do you have any side notes on that or additional information?
Yeah, sure. I can add some stuff. And I just want to say, just for technical bookkeeping purposes, you can edit this out, but I think the audio for both of those takes kept on my version. So we could look into that. But yeah, I think one of the things that I really liked, I'm trying to pull out back the phrase that you said, it's the Terminator with a day job. And you want to talk about, Venture Brothers being an influence, whether, we want it or not. And that's kind of like a concept that came about with that show. I've often pitched people Venture Brothers. It's like, well, it's Batman, but you have to watch Batman do his taxes, and you never see him catch a criminal. And I think we're seeing a lot of that in this world. You're seeing, the everyday of like these large monolithic entities. So it has all the hallmarks of what this kind of fiction, this kind of universe would have. We have like giant corporations, and the giant corporations are giant units. They all have their various characteristics and signifiers that give them like that very fun flavor. But then again, you're going to see the ways in which all of that pomp and circumstance breaks down in an interaction just between two individual actors in a moment. And I think, we have a lot of, really big Android factions. That's obviously one. But I think we have a lot of, in terms of lore, the groups that we've tried to craft them in very unique ways. And we've tried to, in ways that mirror our own universe and groups within our own universe. But we're not trying to necessarily, not everyone is a corporation. There are other entities pulling from different things. And I think one of my favorite, I guess without getting too much into it, because we haven't necessarily written this scene yet, but it's the one I'm looking the most forward to writing, is there is one group who is very defined by being a coalition and trying to be, I guess, similar to what Rojava is in our own time. So it's all these disparate groups of people, some of whom may be anarchists, some of them aren't. Some of them are extremely religious, some of them aren't. And they have to make this thing work, because the alternative to making whatever they have work for themselves is just straight up bondage at the hands of some larger, entity. And I think that's the other, interesting thing that we're playing with, is that we're trying to express a world without states that is not anarchist. We're trying to find a way to make that inconsistency seem reasonable, make it seem reasonable that it's lasted this long, I guess, without being too depressing. But I think, without necessarily spoiling it, if going back to inspirations, I get a sense that this is a story that, and I honestly kind of think I'm the only one who's the mega huge Lord of the Rings fan, in the writing group. But even like before I started putting my DNA into the project, I got a strong sense of like eucatastrophe, that term that you might have heard when people talk about Tolkien, but lame people like me, nerdy people like me who like to, just, I mean, I even literally just, it's my birthday in like a week or so, and one of the gifts my fiance got me is this metal sign that has, Narsil, the broken sword, in the ring inscription, and from that, the tree of Gondor is sprouting, and it's dope. I love it. But we get this sense that, humanity is just thinning out. It's not unlike the elves at the end of the Second Age and the start of the Third Age, or towards the end of the Third Age and the start of the Fourth. Like, the elves are toast, but they're still there. But the difference here is, I guess you could think of this story, it's Lord of the Rings, but the elves stayed around and tried to push back on the Age of Man, except this time, we're seeing a potential turning of an age. Is like humanity is either going to overcome the inconsistencies within itself and move forward, or the androids are just going to fully supplant them and be better and more efficient versions of being inconsistent and illogical.
A precipice of total dystopia, or potential utopia. I like that.
Yeah.
Can you tell me quickly about this age thing that you were talking about a second ago?
Oh yeah. So just like in Lord of the Rings, like the whole premise of like that universe is that everything starts with like this divinity, this quote unquote divine plan. I don't want to say perfect, but like, because it's undefined, but it's very close to this original divine source. And as things get more settled and more defined, they get less magical, less supernatural, more like the world that we find ourselves in. And as things become more settled, the idea is that everything is just a lesser version of something that had come before it. We have, the Byzantine Empire, but that's not as good as Rome in its heyday, which isn't as good as Mycenaean Greece or something like that. Gondor is great and everything, but Numenor was way better, and Valinor kicks the shit out of all of that. So, and at each...
Everything's getting worse all the time.
Yeah, everything's getting worse all the time, but the it's not a cynical or nihilistic viewpoint, because it's, for someone who probably would have hated communists, he's almost like a little Marxist in the, or at least dialectical in this thing, is that he says eventually things are going to get so bad and the defeats are going to get so massive that it's just gonna work out. Like, eventually, that's like the, part of it, as you say, is because it's a fairy tale, and a fairy tale should have a happy ending. But like that, eventually, humankind is just gonna get so inconsistent and so illogical that at the end of this series of depressing defeats, we're gonna finally figure it out, and at that point, things will be good. That's kind of like, I'm sure I'm butchering it, and people who are like more hardcore into Lord of the Rings are going to say that's completely and entirely wrong. But I think in a lot of ways, this story that we're building can evoke, similar feelings. Yes, it's this dark and grueling and depressing world, but no matter how depressing and awful we try to make it. And we tried deliberately. I think there was a pitch I wrote for an advertisement that truly made the world seem bleak and awful, but I think it's really hard for humans to create a world so impossible that humans could not find a way for that world to somehow get better.
I guess sort of to build off of that, I just finished reading / listening, if you want to call it that, with an audiobook of Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. And I guess first to sort of give that story its flowers, like, the world is very close to what we have nowadays. Like, there is ecological destruction. Everything is literally on fire. And at the same time, like, this group of, let's be honest, broken people come together to try and make something better. And I think part of the lore, or I guess the spirit, if you want to call it, of the story is that no matter how bad things are, like Rusty was saying, or how bad a person is, there's, as long as you're alive and there's time, like, you can make the world better, even if it's not going to be the best. Like, you can still save something that is worth pushing forward into the next generation. Like, I guess, for lack of a better term, it's kind of an answer to a lot of the more doomery sides of the conversation that are out there right now. And I'm just hoping that it inspires folks to do something.
Yeah, as part of your kind of transitional period kind of approach that you have to this situation. Would you like to end us off, guys, on a small talk about what excites you most about the project and where you think it finds itself in genre as a whole?
Sure. I would say that right now I'm most excited about getting to introduce people to all the different characters, because even though a lot of the times they're, like, super serious, like, they are all nerds in their own special way, and I love it. And I hope people love it too. But just getting to explore what a world in transition would look like, and seeing how people would react, at least in what we're allowing them to react to and how. Like, I'm excited to see where it ultimately ends up.
Yeah, and I think, as I said up front, I'm like really excited for writing these groups that might show up in a couple issues down the line. And, honestly, not to get schmaltzy, I'm really excited to see the artwork that Solid continues to churn out, because throughout this whole process, even moving from concept to draft after draft, it just, every time you put pen to ink, or digital pencil to digital paper, I see such, like, growth. It's such cool stuff. Like, that's been the most fun part of this, because I like to do drawing and visual art and all that kind of stuff too, but Solid is just fantastic, and I've been able to be able to go, well, what if we did this kind of thing and showed it this way? And Solid is able to just run with it every time. I can be Principal Skinner, drawing the Puma Pride on a napkin, and he'll give me a beautiful mural from that. So I'm just very excited to see how this artwork keeps going. I've learned a lot about things to apply in my own drawing just from watching Solid draw.
Thanks, Rusty. I'm not gonna lie. There are points in the day where I do wonder, like, is there any way to do this faster? And I will say on my end that, working with you and Steven has definitely either pushed me to try something new or shown me something where it's like, oh, I could actually make this a lot simpler if I just did X as opposed to Y. And I know that has led to some redos, but I do think that we're definitely on the right path as far as visuals go. So I'm glad of that.
I know you asked about the genre. I mean, like the easy answer is science fiction, but I actually don't know that that's true. I think we're trending at this point closer to like high fantasy. It's just not in that veneer that you might expect of it. Or I think we're kind of treading a middle line between science fiction and so like a high like science high fantasy. We're not totally throwing out logic and reason for the rule of cool, but I think we're letting the story be what it needs to be. At least I get that impression. I think like the story is the superseding element, and the characters and the people and the world around it sort of fills in to be what it needs to be to get these characters where they need to go.
Yeah, and I guess if I had to take a stab at it, again, like the one thing that I wanted to call it was solar punk. And I know that I've called it crepuscular solar punk at one point, but I do think the reason I call it that is because it's like, yes, it has these visions of the future that may be a utopia in the, I guess, derisive sense, if you want to call it that, but it's also sort of like you've got these elements of, I guess, more classic science fiction or cyberpunk where it's like you have your mega corporations and things like that. And I feel like those are meant to. It's sort of like if you're introducing someone to a house party, right? And the house party is not at your house. Like you want to, have like your chips and dip in the foyer so that people can be like, oh yeah, I understand this place. Before you're like, oh, by the way, the living room is an entire jacuzzi. Like we just felt like it was not being utilized properly with the TV alone. So just put this hot tub in the middle of the entire floor. Also, the dance floor on top of it.
Okay, you lost your mind there.
I might have, but that's just the way I roll. I like to have water everywhere.
I think I see what you're saying. It's a bit of a fish out of water situation, if you will.
Yeah, though it's probably more for the reader than it is for the characters, because like the characters, for the most part, like they live there. This is Tuesday to them, to borrow from a phrase. But that when it comes to like the yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, well, that's why like I don't want to beat a dead horse. Like I feel like if the Venture Brothers has a genre, then maybe that genre could apply to this too, because like I think the visual genre of the work and the written genre of the work aren't necessarily the same, and that's very intentional.
Yeah, I would definitely say that, because I know that something like this typically would probably have a more cartoony feel to it, as far as like the visuals go, but sort of like, well, I haven't watched as much of the Venture Brothers as you have, Rusty, but I can definitely see like with the humor, like it does not match what you would expect for the type of show that it is, right?
Right.
Like, I could see it being like a live action thing where you have like the actual people doing the actual actions, but no, you've got Johnny Quest supervillains running around, like you said, doing taxes.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. So, like, visually, it's this very engaging, beautiful artwork where there's a lot of action happening, but while the action is happening, the characters might just be like, Rosencrantz and Guildensterning their way through the scenario. Like, they're not acting like action heroes being like, all right, time to bust one out for anarchy, baby. Deuces. They're sitting there going, they're poking fun at each other. They're talking about, what they're gonna do later, or like they're just approaching it more like when I think of the writing, it reminds me a lot of the way that like Vonnegut would write future stories or sci-fi. Like there would be this crazy world there, but it would almost just kind of be in the background for him to tell like here's this crazy world where a whole bunch of nonsense happens, and we cut to a used car salesman who fucking hates his life, and that's where our story picks up.
Yeah. Yeah.
To like, and I like that kind of stuff because I think it shows that no matter how insane or how different the world we find ourselves in through these different eras, through these ages, humans have pretty consistently been humans. We have not changed in like a core kind of way that much.
Agreed. And I guess just before, well, I guess without, I know if you'll allow the brief tangent, it's something that I like to see specifically with your comic, Nick Newsman, because I will say that like I know that it's not meant to be specifically like sci-fi or anything like that, but like just some of the craziness that happens where it's just like, okay, so we're talking about something ordinary and mundane, like, a Christmas speckle. What was the main character going to do? Well, my name is Nick Newsman, and my idea is to give people a copy of Das Kapital in a brick. Why the brick? You'll find out by the end of the book. Don't worry.
Yeah, I love playing around with like extremely absurd scenarios, but like people doing very small things with them. I'm a big fan of really big worlds and really small people, if that makes sense. Because
that is beautiful.
That's what we all are, right? Most of us are very small people in a very big world. So it's nice to see that, reflected sometimes.
And can you tell us a little bit more about where we can find you guys and where we can support the book?
Definitely, if you're looking to see it in like a hard copy form that you can hold in your hands, the easiest way to support us, if you can, is at Sisyphus Media Syndicate at patreon.com. Any little bit that you're able to pitch in helps us to get the issues out faster and in a quality that, you can hold in your hands, for lack of a better term. Otherwise, I'm at Solid Black Part on Instagram, and you can also support us there at Sisyphus Media Syndicate on Instagram as well.
And for me, like Solid said, I will draw a strip called Nick Newsman. It's admittedly been on a bit of hiatus, though I did put a comic out kind of recently, and that's at Instagram under at Nick Newsman. So like Nick Newsman, but it's Newsman because, as I said up front, I like really stupid and annoying jokes, so the joke is that it's his name and not his profession, and he never talks about what he does. I mean, if I could pitch the show to you, it's Kent Brockman if Kent Brockman was an anarchist, and it's a show where it's not current events. I rarely talk about current events. He rarely reads the news. The news is, as Solid said, is usually like or if I'm using current events, it's a pretext for some other kind of statement. And it's really just a place where I like to play around with these political ideas and go, hey, I believe in these things, but I'm not above, making fun of them or poking holes in the logic just for fun. And I also have a very old, pretty inactive account, but if you're into arts and crafts and needlepoint, you can also find me at Needler Point, where I have some old needle points that I've done.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, maybe one day soon you'll see maybe potentially some new music projects from me. That's why Nick Newsman's been on a bit of a break. I've been playing a lot of music lately.
Well, that's a pretty good reason for a break. All right, guys. Well, thanks very much for talking with me today. I think we're all excited to see the project get released fairly soon. Do we have an estimate on the time for that?
If I'm able to keep trucking, it'll be done by the end of this month or early next month. I'm trying to be as quick as possible with as many shortcuts as I can find.
Well, as long as AI isn't drawing our comics just yet, I'll be happy. So, thanks again for coming, guys. And yeah, hopefully we'll be releasing the comic soon. So,
yeah, thanks. It was a lot of fun.
Perfect. So, given that most of our characters in this comic are AI, who's to say that they have not already seeped into all of our brains and turned us into the Terminators?
And I just want to go on record. I want to go on record. We started writing this thing way before ChatGPT was like everyone's grandma's favorite dinner topic. So we were timely and very omniscient in this. So you should definitely give us money. We know what's up.
Didn't we start writing this in 2020 or something like that?
Well, I will say.
Hang on. Check your audio, Saul.
Sorry. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Okay. Though I will say, I think it was possibly because Octavia Butler appeared to all of us. It is a fact. Like she is not dead. She is a time traveler. She knew about all of this stuff before it happened. She just had to get this last bit out. Okay, that's my story. And
I'm just on a watch list. All right. Well, yeah, this is going to be a really cool comic, and I think everyone will have a little something they can take from it. And I'm very proud for my part writing on it. So, anyways, yeah, thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you.